Very inspiring speech, I thought. And now I would like to invite our first keynote. Our first keynote today is a slight change to the printed agenda that you were given this morning. We are very pleased and very fortunate to have with us Tensie Whelan, Director of the Center for Sustainable Business at NYU's Stern School of Business, who will give the first keynote address on the future of sustainable finance, business ethics, and the bottom line. Professor Whelan has over 25 years' experience working on local, national, and international environmental and sustainability issues to engage businesses in mainstream sustainability. She's the former president of the Rainforest Alliance, where she built the organization from a $4.5 million to $50 million budget organization. She recruited 5,000 companies in more than 60 countries. Professor Whelan has been recognized by Ethisphere as one of the 100 most influential people in business ethics. She was a City Fellow in Leadership and Ethics at NYU Stern. She has served on numerous nonprofit boards and corporate advisory boards, such as Unilever and Nespresso. And she was most recently appointed a member of the board of directors for Aston Martin and an advisor to the Future Economy Project for Harvard Business Review. At this point in time, I'd like to invite Professor Whelan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning. God, it's so nice to see such cheery, bright faces here. You had your coffee, I can tell. I was up last night because my daughter was playing a gig in Bushwick, so I'm really cool but really tired. So I'd like to start with an assertion, right? And that assertion, since we're amongst friends here, we're all responsible investors, is that corporate sustainability creates financial value. But if that's the case, why are we still struggling, as we heard from Amisha, as we heard from the Deputy General, to get more financing into sustainability? We have studies that show the correlation between ESG and good financial performance, meta-studies that have looked at several hundred, several thousand, and find an ongoing correlation. But the challenge is that we don't understand the causality, because when you look under the hood, the corporates are not tracking the return on their sustainability investments, other than simple things like energy savings. So when you really try to understand where is that value being created and why, or where is it being destroyed and why, you don't have the information as either corporate leaders or investors. ESG reporting and financial reporting are completely divorced. So you have your sustainability report, you have your financial report. You don't understand what the connection is. And even when we have great institutions like the SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is doing a great job helping us focus on what's financially material on ESG, there is not a financial element to that accounting standard, right? So again, we continue to have this divorce, which leads to circular conversations about the business case because we do not have the data, right? And that ultimately leads to poor corporate and investor decision-making about where you should be putting your money. So why is this return on sustainability investment, or ROSI, not being tracked? Assessing ROSI, as I'm going to call it, is difficult to implement, right? You have many different sustainability strategies that sit in one place or a couple of places and then are executed in many different places. So understanding the impact across all these different units is really challenging. Also, sustainability strategies, when implemented, are not tied to financial return from the beginning, right? So they're looking for different types of metrics, but not necessarily the financial metrics. And a lot of benefits are intangible, difficult to measure. You can measure them, you can monetize them. And today, as we know, most companies have 85% of their value are in intangibles. We need to understand how to better monetize these areas. And finally, and this is how it's, one other point, the finance function is not clear that there's a benefit to them to go in and actually change all of their systems, train everybody, it's a big deal, in order to begin to better track this information, because they're not sure there's that much value being created. And finally, and this is your responsibility, investors are not asking for it, right? There's no pushing. So at Stern Center for Sustainable Business, we've developed a model called ROSI, Return on Sustainability Investment, that has identified 9 mediating factors that drive financial performance at the corporate level. These include improved risk management, improved employee relations, better innovation, better operational efficiency, more media coverage, better sales and marketing, more consumer loyalty, better supplier relations, and better stakeholder engagement. Now, those are mediating factors that can be driven by a variety of things, not just sustainability, right? They're driven by good management. But what we're seeing is that sustainability is increasingly good management. It's that next wave of good management. So let's look at a few of these mediating factors together and see what we can learn from that in terms of understanding the return on sustainability investment. And let's start with risk mitigation and management, which is always challenging to measure, but a really critical issue for investors and corporates. So McKinsey has released a study finding that 25 to 70% of EBITDA can be at risk due to environmental and social issues. About 70% related to reputational regulatory issues and license to operate issues. Think VW as an example. 25% at risk due to supply chain disruptions, and I actually think that number is going to grow due to the impacts of climate change and social unrest. An example of that would be during Hurricane Katrina. Almost all of the coffee coming into the United States goes through the port of New Orleans. So the disruption of coffee into our country was really challenging at that time. Now, speaking of coffee, I'm going to talk sort of just in one industry looking at risk. So how many here love coffee? Okay, good. Second most traded commodity in the world, right? Climate change is causing an immense impact on coffee. And if you are an investor in a company that is in coffee, or if you are a coffee company, you need to be managing for climate change. We now have extreme drought and extreme floods, which is resulting in decreased productivity, more disease, lower quality, loss of harvest, and ultimately what's happening is that the coffee is no longer being able to be grown at lower altitudes. It's moving higher up the mountain. And think about that. How many tops of mountains do we have, right? So you need to begin to understand these issues if you're in coffee or if you're investing in this. And this is true for many different commodities. So as an example of a company that's doing something about this, Nespresso buys only from the 1% top quality coffee in the world. That's their business model. If they want to be in business, they need to manage for this. So they are working with all 80,000 of the farmers that they purchase from around the world with a variety of different partners who are helping them to put in place practices that will make the coffee farms more resilient, like planting trees and a variety of other things. Nespresso is also looking for new sources of coffee to diversify. And one of the other challenges around coffee is that farmers are aging out, the economics don't work for them. So Nespresso is working on that as well through a variety of different social programs to help encourage younger farmers to get into farming. If investors are not asking companies like Nespresso regularly, how are you managing your climate change risk? How are you managing the social issues related to farmers aging out? You are not doing your job as investors and you're going to get caught, right? And the corporations who are not managing for these issues are going to have major competitive problems moving forward. All right, so that's risk. So let's look at another area in terms of creating return on sustainability investment, operational efficiency. So companies spend, unfortunately, a lot of time trying to avoid regulations that require them to reduce pollution. But pollution is an operational inefficiency. Think about it. You buy more than you need in order to use only part of it, in order to pay to dispose of the rest of it. That is not a financially smart approach, right? So some examples of that, smart companies are beginning to figure this out. Domtar, a pulp and paper company, sells to Staples. They had waste that it was toxic waste that they had to dispose of from their pulp and paper mills. They were paying to dispose of it. They looked at that and they came up with a circular solution. They said, actually, this is a bio-based product that we can turn into a fertilizer for farmers in our community. This fertilizer will have less of an environmental impact than the nitrogen-based fertilizer that they currently use. It'll be less expensive for the farmers, and we can make some money off of it, and we won't have to pay our landfill waste disposal costs anymore. Brilliant, right? Requires an entirely different mindset about what are you thinking about in terms of your waste. Another example, we worked with in our ROSI methodology, automotive companies, GM, VW, Aston Martin, and looked at 18 different sustainability strategies and monetized all the different practices they had. Just looking at the waste reduction strategy, one particular practice that auto companies put in place is to recycle paint and solvents. When you recycle paint and solvents, you no longer are buying the virgin product, so you're saving money. You no longer are paying the waste disposal costs, so you're saving money. And actually, they had extra left over that they were selling, so they were making money. Now, here's the important point. Nobody was collecting all that information and putting it together and aggregating it and tying it back to their waste reduction strategy as the benefit of that strategy. So this ties back to the fact that we're doing these things, but we don't actually understand the financial impacts, and we need to begin to better track them. And investors need to push with that. So moving on from operational efficiencies to another mediating factor that drives financial performance is innovation. And this is actually my favorite. There's so much innovation going on, but it's driven by a sustainability mindset that we need in order to solve for, as we heard from the Deputy General, the environmental and social challenges that we have in front of us. So you can innovate in processes, like we heard with Domtar. You can innovate in services. You can innovate in products. And putting that sustainability lens really creates a whole new opportunity for you. So I'm going to give you one of my favorite examples that is a circular solution in all senses. So Goodyear has come up with a tire, okay, circular, that is made from, so it's 3D printed, so you only print what you need. It is printed out of recycled rubber, so they're recycling the rubber. It has embedded moss inside of it that when it rains makes the tire stickier on the road because the tire is actually hard rubber. It's not inflated, so it lasts longer. So the tire is stickier, which means it's safer when it rains. And the embedded moss takes in carbon dioxide and emits oxygen. And the hub has a little AI feature that enables it to be autonomous. Okay. This is a tire, right? And the engineers are trying to solve for a number of different challenges in that tire. Now, it's a prototype. Will they end up with something that complicated? Probably not. But the tire industry is actually innovating a whole series of sustainability challenges, thinking things in this very, very different way. So as investors, you need to be looking, are your companies solving for challenges using the products or services that they have? Some other examples, I'm going to turn to the fashion sector because they are one of the second most polluting industry in the world, major focus on them. So a whole series of things are happening in fashion, right? So first, we're seeing these are wild, spray-on t-shirts with bio-based products. Spray it on, when you get tired of it, you take it off, and then you just can use it again to spray something else, right? Another example is, going back to 3D printing, you can, on your home 3D printer, print yourself a fabulous dress. It takes 36 hours. But in the future, they will be able to do that in a much shorter period of time. That is also made out of a bio-based product that when you're tired of it, you give it back, and then you can print something else out instead, right? Also in the fashion sector, we're seeing lab-grown leather. We're seeing sort of green chemistry coming up with natural dyes that reduce the amount of water and pollution. All kinds of fascinating things happening in materials and so on. My final example of innovation is a mainstream example, also in fashion, which is Nike. So Nike has set up the company to have sustainability embedded in their innovation unit. And innovation is core to Nike, right? So this is another thing you should be looking at, just as an aside, is sustainability in the companies you're investing put in that core embedded area, or is it off to the side? But so they put it core to innovation. And in that, when they design new products, they have a whole list of things that they're trying to solve for from an environmental point of view, but also from a performance and coolness and all the things that they want to have happen at Nike. So they said, we need to come up with a higher performance shoe, but we also need to tackle this issue that the typical way that you make a sneaker on the upper is you cut out all these different pieces and then you sew them together. It's incredibly inefficient. You leave all this waste everywhere when you're doing that. So they came up instead with an idea of a recycled, one strand of recycled polymer that they weave into the upper of the sneaker. That has led to a sneaker that is 15% lighter, so it's higher performance. They've reduced waste by 80%, and it's a $1 billion plus business, and it's been a disruptor in the industry. If you look now, you'll see a whole lot of the other sneaker companies are employing that type of methodology, right? So they through their sustainability lens, they have a major innovation. So again, investors need to be thinking about where is that innovation coming from? How is sustainability deriving innovation? The final area that I want to focus on quickly is around how a company that has purpose, as we've heard Larry Fink sort of charge CEOs to have purpose, positive impact, et cetera, how that can drive customer and employee loyalty. And you can monetize those things. So let's just take a look quickly at Unilever that's made a commitment. Their sustainable living strategy is their business strategy. They made a commitment to double their growth while having their environmental footprint, 100% sustainable sourcing, phasing out plastic packaging, all those good things. They also have a line of purpose-oriented products. Those products have grown 67% faster than the rest of the business in 2018, delivered 75% of their growth in that year. They also are the second or third most consumer employer on LinkedIn, which for a CPG company is unheard of, right? Nobody wants to go work for CPG, it's boring, blah, blah, blah. So, but Unilever has changed that around the world. People want to go work for Unilever because of their sustainability focus. Speaking of consumers, I also want to talk a little bit about, people talk about this green gap. You hear, like, people say they want to buy stuff, but then they don't actually buy stuff. So we at Stern said, okay, well, what do the academic studies actually say about this? So when we looked around, we found that nobody had actually tracked real consumer purchasing a product, just surveys. So we partnered with IRI, which collects our barcode data at retail for consumer packaged goods. And we looked at 5 years of data. And what we found was that in 2018, about 16.6% of all products in CPG are sustainability marketed. We looked at 36 of 40 categories, 73,000 SKUs, et cetera. And that equaled about $114 billion of sales. But more importantly, 50% of the growth from 2013 to 2018 came from sustainability marketed products. All of the categories, the growth in the sustainability marketed products was higher than the growth in the conventional products. In some categories, like dairy, they were in a deficit situation. You just saw the bankruptcy of Dean Foods, for example. They were in a deficit situation except for the sustainability offerings, which were actually in a growth mode. Right? So as investors, again, we need to hear and we need to see and understand that these trends are actually happening now and they have an impact. So in order to, so let's talk a little bit about what you can do as investors, right? So in order to meet global and environmental challenges, we need, as we heard, to scale up investment in sustainability. In order to do that, we need to understand both ESG